The next topic we'll go over in a bit more detail is changing the colors for the report, both as a whole and for the individual components or sources. The default color palette for the report components is shown over here at the top. To change the color palette, we can click on the palette name. We'll see several preloaded themes with a check mark next to the selected palette. We also have the option to create our own palette by selecting Add Palette. In here, we can rename our palette, and we can make changes in several ways. We can move the order of the existing colors, or we can delete colors. We can add back another color, and we can modify an existing color. Or we can even make changes in the raw palette editor if we know the hex color codes. To keep our custom palette here, we can click OK, or we could click Cancel if we don't want to save it after all. Once we click OK, the palette is created and it's applied to the report. If we wanted to delete our custom palette, we can do that, or we can go in and edit one of our existing custom palettes. We also notice that on this current sheet, only two of the components readjusted to the report color palette. This has to do with whether we've chosen for our components to sync colors. Now let's go over the color sync feature in the PolyAnalyst report editor. By default, components have the color sync option turned on. We can see this by selecting a component, going to the properties, and going to the color tab. We see that the sync colors option is set to yes for this component. But if we instead selected no, we'll see that it opens options to select a different coloration just for this component. We can also change it back by toggling the option back to yes, or by restoring the default. So if you're wanting to change the global color palette and you're noticing some components aren't updating, be sure to check the color sync option and whether or not it is switched to yes. Now, color sync can be highly useful for discovering the right coloration for your report with just a simple click. For example, we can choose different palettes to test out a variety of colors for our report. And if we switch to a sheet where all the components are set to color sync on this page, we see that all the components have adopted the color palette. Whereas for a sheet without any color sync on, we notice that none of the components have accepted the color theme that we've selected. So in this way, we are given full control over how to customize the colors of certain components and sheets of the report. One additional color sync option you have in the report editor is the ability to sync the colors of a given data series across the report. For example, let's say we wanted to sync the colors for the sentiment data in the report across all visualizations that display sentiment data. We can do this by first ensuring that the components with our sentiment data are all set to yes for the sync colors setting. Of course, on this sheet, all of the components are set to yes. Next, we select a component that contains the data series that we want to sync the colors for. Then all we need to do is change the colors for each of the sentiments in this data series. We do this by navigating to the component properties and the color menu. And then we simply change each of these colors to whichever colors we wish. Now we can see that any component with sentiment data has synced to the colors that we have selected. And this occurs across the entire report. So on the main page, we see that the bar charts have adopted the colors because they were switched to color sync. But of course, on the sheet where our report has disabled color sync, we see that the components have not adopted the new color selections. Finally, we can always choose to reset the data series colors we synced. All we need to do is click the Restore Colors button in our Colors tab of the component. Then we see that it has reverted to the report theme color palette again. And of course, we see that this has occurred throughout the entire report for any components that were synced.